One rainy night, a man spotted a tiny creature shivering on the roadside. Its small body quivered and the cold, wide eyes pleading for rescue. He wrapped it gently in his shirt and carried it home, vowing to keep it safe. But within days, unsettling signs appeared. Strange sounds no puppy should make, movements too swift, eyes that glowed in the dark. Worried, he took it to the vet. The doctor's face turned pale, his voice trembling as he revealed the truth. What the man had saved wasn't a puppy at all, and the discovery stunned everyone. The night stretched endless and black, the country road glistening like a ribbon of wet ink beneath a cold September rain. Mark's windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, the only sound breaking the hush of midnight as his headlights sliced through drifting curtains of mist. Each mile carried him closer to home and farther from the last scattered lights of town, until only dark fields and shadowed trees flanked the narrow road. He eased his truck around a sweeping bend and caught a sudden flicker of movement at the edge of the pavement. Something small low to the ground. For an instant he thought it was a branch blown free in the storm, but then it shifted. A trembling, living shape barely larger than a football. Mark tapped the brakes, heart quickening. The truck's beams fell full on the figure. A tiny creature crouched in the ditch, slick black fur plastered to its narrow body. Rainwater pooled around it, and yet it did not run. Instead, it huddled tighter, shivering violently. Through the rain-streaked glass, Mark glimpsed two faint pinpoints of gold that caught the light and held it, eyes reflecting back with an eerie, almost luminous clarity. Compassion overrode caution. He slowed to a crawl, hazard lights flashing, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. The night air bit at his skin as he stepped out, boots sinking into mud. The smell of wet earth and pine filled his breath. "Hey there, little one," he called softly, crouching to appear less threatening. The creature flinched but didn't flee. Raindrops tapped its fur like tiny drumbeats. Mark slipped off his flannel overshirt, wrapping it gently around the shivering body. It was astonishingly cold and light in his arms, no heavier than a bundle of leaves. He felt a faint, quick heartbeat against his chest, a fragile pulse of life trusting him without question. Cradling the bundle, Mark glanced back at the lonely, rain-slick road. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a story he could not yet imagine was beginning. With one last look into those strange golden eyes, he whispered, "You're safe now," and carried the mystery into the warmth of his truck. By the time Mark reached his driveway, the storm had softened to a cold, misting drizzle. Porch lights glowed like distant lanterns through the haze, guiding him home. He eased the truck to a stop and carefully lifted the bundled creature, mindful of the small heartbeat that pulsed against his chest. Inside, the familiar scent of cedar and coffee welcomed them. Mark nudged the door shut with his foot and crossed to the living room, where a wood stove still held a fading ember glow. He knelt beside it, adding kindling until the fire snapped alive, throwing gentle warmth across the room. The little one stirred, tiny claws catching on the fabric of his flannel shirt. As Mark unwrapped the bundle, the creature blinked slowly, eyes reflecting the amber flames with an uncanny gleam. Its coat, though damp, shone a deep jet black, so dark it seemed to drink in the light. Steam curled faintly where heat touched wet fur. "You're safe now," Mark murmured again, setting down a soft towel and gently rubbing the small body dry. The creature trembled once, then gave a faint chirping sound that was neither bark nor meow, something altogether different, delicate and quick like a bird's note. Mark smiled despite the strangeness. "Shadow," he said suddenly. The name fit as perfectly as if it had waited all along. Something about the way the animal moved, silent and fluid like a living piece of night. Shadow tilted its head as if recognizing the name, then nestled deeper into the towel, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Mark fetched a shallow bowl of warm water and a plate of soft dog food, placing them nearby. Shadow sniffed, licked at the water once but ignored the food entirely. Settling into the armchair with a quiet sigh, Mark watched the tiny figure curled before the fire. Outside rain whispered against the windows. Inside, the room felt wrapped in a fragile peace, a pause before answers or questions. In that quiet moment, man and mystery rested together, and Mark believed, if only briefly, that kindness had solved the night's riddle. Morning crept in on a muted gray light, rain still pattering softly against the eaves. Mark awoke to an unusual stillness. Normally, a rescued puppy would greet dawn with restless whines and tiny paws scratching for attention, but the house lay silent, the only sound the low crackle of embers in the wood stove. He rose and found Shadow not on the blanket where he'd left him, but perched neatly on the wide windowsill. The little creature sat upright, tail curled like a question mark, gazing out at the dripping trees. Its posture was elegant, almost feline. At the faint creak of Mark's footsteps, Shadow turned, eyes catching the dull morning light and igniting into molten gold. For a heartbeat, they glowed as if lit from within. "Good morning, Shadow," Mark said softly. The animal blinked, head tilting with uncanny deliberation. When he set down a fresh bowl of warm milk and some soft puppy kibble, Shadow leapt to the floor with effortless precision, landing soundlessly despite the height. He sniffed the food, gave a delicate chirp like a tiny bird call, and stepped away uninterested. Mark frowned. Not hungry? He tried bits of cooked chicken, even a splash of broth. Shadow only watched, eyes bright but distant, before padding to the hearth and curling with quiet dignity. Throughout the day, the pattern continued. No barks, no playful nips, just silent observation and those quick, fluid movements that seemed too exact for a dog. By late afternoon, Mark caught another surprise. While he chopped vegetables in the kitchen, a faint rustling drew his eye upward. Shadow balanced on top of a tall bookcase, having scaled it without a sound. A ripple of unease threaded through Mark's curiosity. He had saved a helpless creature, but as he watched those glowing eyes tracking every motion, a question formed like a shadow itself. What, exactly, had he brought into his home? By the next afternoon, a weak sun pushed through thinning clouds, turning puddles to mirrors across the gravel drive. Mark stepped outside to gather firewood, leaving the back door propped open so Shadow could explore. The small creature padded onto the porch with silent steps, pausing to sniff the damp air. Its sleek black coat caught the sudden sunlight, gleaming like polished obsidian. The quiet didn't last. A familiar bark echoed from across the fence. Bella, the neighbor's golden retriever, bounding toward them with her usual friendly wag. But as soon as Bella caught sight of Shadow, her cheerful energy faltered. She froze mid-stride, hackles rising in a stiff ridge. A low growl rolled from deep in her chest, a sound Mark had never heard from the gentle dog. Shadow turned, eyes narrowing to amber slits. From its throat came a sound unlike any puppy's bark, a low, resonant rumble edged with something almost primal. Bella's growl broke into a sharp yelp as she retreated, tail tucked, scrambling backward until she disappeared behind the fence. The yard fell silent except for the faint rustle of leaves. Mark's heart thudded. He knelt, calling softly, "Easy, Shadow." The creature merely tilted its head, unruffled, as though nothing had happened. Moments later, the side gate creaked open and Mrs. Wilkins, Bella's owner, stepped out, concern written across her face. "What on earth spooked her?" she asked, scanning the yard. Her eyes landed on Shadow and her brows knit. "That's no ordinary pup, Mark. Where did you find it?" Other neighbors, drawn by the brief commotion, gathered near the fence, curiosity buzzing like static. Some admired the striking black coat. Others whispered uneasily. Mark offered a careful smile, explaining only that he'd rescued a stray on the roadside. Yet as murmurs spread and eyes lingered on the silent, watchful creature, he felt the weight of unspoken doubts. When the last neighbor drifted away, Mark closed the gate and looked down at Shadow, who sat calmly in the fading light, amber eyes reflecting secrets. The question returned, sharper now. What exactly had he welcomed into his life? The house settled into its nighttime hush, the kind of deep silence broken only by the occasional sigh of old wood and the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Rain had finally stopped, leaving the world wrapped in a damp, moonlit stillness. Mark, exhausted from the long day, drifted into sleep with Shadow curled at the foot of the bed like an inky coil of fur. Sometime past 2 a.m., a faint sound pried him from dreams. Not a bark or whimper, something subtler like claws gliding across hardwood. He blinked into darkness, heart quickening. The blanket at his feet was empty. Shadow. His voice was low, uncertain. A soft rustle answered from the hallway. Mark swung his legs over the edge of the bed, the floor cool beneath his feet. He followed the sound down the narrow corridor, guided only by silver slices of moonlight spilling through the windows. Each step deepened the unease curling in his chest. In the living room, shadows pooled thickly around furniture. At first he saw nothing. Then his gaze lifted and froze. High on the tall bookshelf near the fireplace sat Shadow, poised with eerie grace, its body balanced effortlessly on the narrow edge, tail draped like a dark ribbon. Eyes gleamed a liquid green, catching every wisp of moonlight until they seemed to glow from within. Mark's breath hitched. "How did you get up there?" he whispered, half in awe. Shadow tilted its head, unblinking, and let out a soft, clicking chirp, a sound closer to a forest bird at dawn than any dog. Then, with a movement so fluid it was almost a blur, the creature leapt to the floor. It landed without a single sound, muscles rippling like water, and padded past him into the darker hallway. Mark remained rooted, a chill rippling along his skin. The night held its breath around him. Whatever Shadow was, it did not move through the world like a puppy, and for the first time since that rainy roadside rescue, he wondered if he had invited something truly wild into his home. Morning brought a pale wash of sunlight, but no comfort. Mark sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold, the glow of his laptop casting restless light across the room. Shadow lay curled on the hearth, perfectly still except for the slow, steady rise of its tiny chest. The night's strange images replayed in Mark's mind, the silent leap from the bookcase, the eerie, bird-like chirp, the eyes alive with their own inner fire. He began to type, fingers moving with mounting urgency. Puppy glowing eyes, dog making chirping sounds, animal climbs like a cat. The search engine returned a jumble of theories, some amusing, others unsettling. Exotic dog breeds with reflective retinas, hybrid fox dogs bred in captivity, even a few fringe posts about mysterious wild cubs trafficked as pets. Mark clicked through pages of photographs, holding each next to the memory of Shadow's sleek form and impossible balance. Nothing fit. None of the breeds, Shiba Inu, Belgian Shepherd, even obscure Nordic mixes, matched the uncanny precision of those leaps or the strange refusal of food. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You're not in any book, are you?" he murmured, glancing toward the hearth. Shadow opened its golden eyes as if on cue, unblinking, and offered a soft, deliberate chirp. The sound sent a small shiver along Mark's spine. He thought of last night's encounter with Bella, the way the gentle retriever had fled from a single low growl. Ordinary dogs didn't inspire that kind of instinctive fear. A new worry surfaced, heavier than curiosity. If Shadow was truly something wild, what were the risks for him, for the neighborhood, for the animal itself? He stared at the glowing laptop screen, then at the watchful creature across the room. The questions only deepened, but one truth settled like a stone. Answers wouldn't come from the internet alone. Whatever mystery he'd carried out of the rain, it was larger than any late-night search could explain. By late morning, the unease had hardened into resolve. Mark slipped a soft towel into the travel crate and coaxed Shadow inside. The little creature entered without protest, its glowing eyes steady, as if it somehow sensed the importance of the trip. Rain clouds were breaking apart overhead when Mark pulled onto the slick country road, the crate secured on the passenger seat and a knot of worry tightening in his chest. The bell above the clinic door jingled softly as he stepped inside. Warm antiseptic scents and the distant hum of medical equipment replaced the damp chill of the outdoors. Dr. Harris, a seasoned veterinarian with silver at his temples and kind but sharp eyes, emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a towel. "Mark, what brings you in on a Tuesday?" Mark set the crate on the counter. "Found this little one on the roadside 2 nights ago. Thought it was a stray pup, but something feels off." Curiosity flickered across the vet's face. "Let's have a look." He opened the crate and Shadow stepped out with silent grace, pausing to survey the room. Dr. Harris knelt, his practiced hands gentle yet precise as he examined paws, ears, and teeth. The casual rhythm of the checkup began to fray. The vet's brow tightened when he gently parted Shadow's jaw to inspect the teeth. Sharp, conical, far more developed than a domestic pup's. He probed the legs and shoulders, noting the unusually strong muscle tone. "Where exactly did you find him?" he asked, voice lower now. Mark recounted the rainy night, the roadside ditch, the glowing eyes. Dr. Harris listened intently, his expression growing graver with every detail. He reached for a second pair of gloves, examining the thick dark coat and the elongated claws. Finally, he sat back on his heels, the room suddenly quiet but for the ticking wall clock. The warmth in his eyes had cooled to measured concern. "Mark," he said slowly, "this isn't a stray puppy, and it's not a breed I can name offhand. We need to talk about what you might have brought home." Dr. Harris removed his stethoscope with a slow, deliberate motion, the rubber tubing coiling in his hands like a quiet warning. He exhaled, eyes fixed on Shadow, who now sat calmly on the exam table, tail curled in a neat black loop. The animal's golden gaze followed every movement with unnerving precision, as if it understood more than it should. "Mark," the vet began, voice low. "I've treated countless breeds over 30 years, shepherds, huskies, even rare hybrids, but nothing like this. The dental structure alone is far beyond a domestic puppy's development. These canines," he tapped the chart lightly, "are built for hunting, not for kibble." Mark felt a ripple of disbelief. "So, what are you saying? It's not a dog?" Dr. Harris met his eyes, the weight of unspoken possibilities settling between them. "Not a dog in any conventional sense. My best assessment is that you're housing a wild cub, possibly a young wolf, maybe even a more exotic predator. The paw pads, the muscle density, the jaw strength, all point to an animal designed for the wild." The room seemed to tilt. Mark remembered the glowing eyes on the rainy road, the silent leaps onto high shelves, the low growl that had sent Bella running. Suddenly, each memory felt like a warning he had missed. "There's more," the vet continued. "Its calmness is deceptive. These instincts will sharpen quickly. As it matures, territorial and hunting behaviors will emerge. And if it came from illegal wildlife trafficking, there could be health risks: rabies, parasites, unpredictable aggression. Keeping it is dangerous and, in most states, illegal without permits." Mark stared at Shadow, who returned his gaze without fear, almost with quiet affection. His heart tightened. Only days had passed, yet the bond felt real and deep. But the truth now loomed undeniable. Shadow belonged to a world far wilder than the one Mark could offer. Dr. Harris placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You've done nothing wrong. You saved a life, but now you must think about what's right for both of you. This little one was never meant to be a pet." By evening, the story had outgrown Mark's quiet house. It began innocently enough, a passing remark at the feed store where he stopped for supplies. Someone overheard him mention the vet's astonishing discovery. By the time he drove home, a neighbor had already shared a curious post on the town's community board. "Local man rescues mystery puppy. Could it be a wolf cub?" Within hours, curiosity swelled into a tide. Neighbors who had merely waved from their porches earlier now appeared at the gate, phones in hand. Some came with genuine concern. Others were drawn by spectacle. Children pressed their faces to the fence, whispering about a baby wolf. Adults debated in urgent tones about danger and legality. Shadow, as if aware of the commotion, paced the yard with silent elegance, amber eyes catching the dusk. Each movement only fueled the whispers. Bella, the retriever who once bounded to greet everyone, stayed hidden indoors, her earlier fear now a neighborhood talking point. Soon local reporters arrived, headlights sweeping across the gravel drive. A young journalist approached with a microphone and careful smile. "Mr. Lawson, is it true you've been harboring a wild animal? Can we film the cub?" Mark tightened his grip on the gate, torn between protecting Shadow's privacy and explaining the truth. Online, the story spread faster than the evening breeze. Photos of Shadow, those luminous eyes reflecting firelight, traveled across social feeds under hashtags like "Sheer Mystery Puppy" and "Wolf in Town." Supporters flooded comment sections with praise for Mark's compassion, while others demanded immediate removal of the predator. As darkness deepened and flashbulbs popped beyond his fence, Mark felt the weight of every gaze, both digital and physical. What had begun as a quiet act of kindness was now a public spectacle, and the gentle creature he'd saved was at the center of a storm. Inside, Shadow settled by the window, unbothered by the uproar, while Mark stood in the fading light, realizing the decision ahead would no longer be just personal. It had become a matter of community, law, and the wild itself. The following days unfolded in a strange rhythm of tension and quiet intimacy. Each morning, Mark woke to find the yard dotted with fresh footprints in the dew, tiny impressions of paws that had explored every corner of the property before dawn. Yet Shadow was always back inside by breakfast, curled neatly in his favorite spot near the wood stove, amber eyes calm and knowing. Despite the chatter beyond the fence and the endless pings of his phone, life inside the house felt suspended in a fragile peace. Mark cooked simple meals, worked at his desk, and found Shadow never far from reach. The cub followed him from room to room with a silent devotion that warmed and unsettled him at once. When Mark read in the evening, Shadow rested its head against his leg, heartbeat a soft thrum of trust. but the outside world pressed closer. Neighbors dropped subtle warnings about safety and the law. News vans occasionally slowed at the end of the driveway, their long lenses searching for a glimpse. Wildlife officials left polite but firm voicemails requesting an appointment to assess the animal. Each call tightened the invisible clock ticking over their days together. Mark tried to ignore it, to focus on the small rituals that made Shadow feel like family. He tossed a ball across the living room. Shadow leapt after it with astonishing grace, catching it midair without a sound. He set out a mix of lean meat and special vitamins. Shadow accepted the offering with quiet dignity, as if humoring a human custom. At night, however, the unease returned. From his bed, he sometimes heard faint chirps and low rumbles from the hallway, sounds that belonged more to wilderness than to suburbia. He would rise to find Shadow sitting at the window, eyes fixed on the moonlit trees, every muscle poised as if listening to a distant call only he could hear. Mark watched those silent vigils with a heart torn in two. Each passing day deepened their bond, and with it the painful knowledge that love alone might not be enough to keep Shadow where he truly belonged. 3 days later, a firm knock broke the quiet just after dawn. Mark set down his coffee, unease already coiling in his stomach. Through the window he saw a white state vehicle parked neatly at the edge of the gravel drive, its logo of a soaring hawk unmistakable. 2 uniformed wildlife officers stood on the porch, rain jackets beaded with early mist. "Mr. Lawson?" the taller officer asked when Mark opened the door. His tone was courteous but carried the weight of procedure. "I'm Officer Grant with Wildlife Services. This is Officer Patel. We're here regarding the animal you rescued last week." Mark's heart tightened. "Shadow?" "Yes, sir," Grant said gently. "There's been considerable public concern and, after consultation with the local vet, we're required to conduct a formal evaluation. State law prohibits keeping undomesticated predators without a permit. We'd like to see the animal and discuss next steps." Behind them, the morning felt unusually still. A few curious neighbors lingered at the far end of the street, their conversations hushed. Inside, Shadow sensed the change. He padded into the hallway, golden eyes narrowing at the strangers, every movement silent but alert. Mark knelt and stroked the sleek black fur, feeling the tension in the small body. "He's not dangerous," Mark said quietly, though he knew the truth was more complicated. Officer Patel crouched, speaking with calm respect. "We believe you, but wild instincts can surface suddenly. Our job is to ensure his safety and yours. We'd like to arrange a professional assessment at an accredited wildlife center. It's not punishment, it's protection." A hollow ache spread through Mark's chest. The law was clear, and their professionalism left little room for argument. Shadow pressed closer to his leg, trusting as ever. Grant extended a clipboard with official documents. "You have 72 hours to comply. We'll help with every step, but he can't stay here long term." The officers left as quietly as they had arrived, their vehicle rolling away beneath the gray morning sky. Mark closed the door on the thinning mist and leaned against it, the paper heavy in his hand, the countdown already echoing in his heart. That night the house felt different, quieter, as though even the walls understood the decision looming over them. The official notice lay unfolded on the kitchen table, its crisp edges catching the lamplight like a silent ultimatum. Mark sat beside it with a cooling mug of tea, elbows resting on the wood, staring at the words until they blurred into a haze. 72 hours. 3 days to decide how to honor a bond that already felt unbreakable. Shadow slept at his feet, curled into a perfect circle of black fur. Now and then the cub's ears twitched, as if dreaming of some distant wilderness. Mark reached down, letting his fingers trace the soft ridge of its back. The simple rise and fall of that tiny chest filled him with a fierce, aching protectiveness. Memories tumbled through his mind. The rain-slick night on the roadside, the first curious chirp in the living room, the silent leaps onto high shelves, the warm weight of trust when Shadow rested his head against Mark's knee. Each image pressed heavier against the next until the thought of separation felt unbearable. Yet reason whispered steadily. Wild instincts would only sharpen. Muscles built for hunting would demand space and freedom. The law was unambiguous, but more than that, love demanded foresight. Could he truly give Shadow the life he deserved inside 4 suburban walls? Hours passed. Outside, a cold moon drifted between restless clouds, silvering the room with faint light. Mark barely moved except to refill his tea and scratch behind Shadow's ear. The cub stirred, offered a soft, questioning chirp, then nestled closer, trusting completely. Mark swallowed hard, the choice crystallizing with painful clarity. To keep Shadow was to love selfishly. To let him go was to love rightly. Compassion, he realized, was sometimes measured not in what we hold on to, but in the courage to set a beloved free. When dawn finally painted the windows pale, Mark knew what he had to do. The following morning broke clear and cold, the air washed clean by a night of passing rain. Mark moved through the house with quiet purpose. Each step weighted with finality. He set out Shadow's favorite blanket and a small piece of lean meat, then opened the travel crate lined with fresh towels. Shadow watched from the hearth, golden eyes steady and unreadable. "Time to go, buddy," Mark whispered, voice roughened by little sleep. He crouched low and extended a hand. Shadow approached without hesitation, as if sensing this trip was unlike any before. When Mark lifted him, the cub rested calmly against his chest, warm and impossibly light for the weight he carried in his heart. The drive stretched long and strangely still. Morning sun spilled across wet asphalt, turning puddles into shards of glass. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, paws braced on the crate's edge, head tilted to watch the landscape roll by. Fields bright with dew, woods whispering with early wind. Occasionally he let out a soft chirp, not anxious but curious, as if reading Mark's thoughts. Highway signs marked each mile toward the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter, memories flashing like mile markers of their brief life together. The rainy roadside rescue, the silent leaps to the bookshelf, the warm nights beside the fire. Each memory felt both distant and painfully immediate. When the center's cedar gates finally came into view, Mark's chest constricted. He parked beneath towering pines and cut the engine. For a long moment he simply sat, listening to the ticking of the cooling motor and the gentle sound of Shadow's breathing. "You deserve the wild," he murmured, brushing a hand along the silky black coat. "A place to run, to be what you are." Shadow met his gaze with quiet trust, unafraid. With a deep breath, Mark opened the door and stepped into the crisp morning air, carrying the small life that had changed his own. The path to the center awaited, bright with dew and edged in gold, ready for the goodbye love demanded. The Wildlife Center rested at the edge of a sprawling preserve, where dense pines met open meadow and the air smelled of clean earth and resin. A soft mist hovered above the grass as Mark carried Shadow up the stone path, every step echoing with the finality of the moment. Birds called in the distance, their bright notes a quiet welcome to the life that waited beyond these walls. A woman in a forest green jacket greeted him at the entrance. "Mr. Lawson, I'm Dana," she said with a gentle smile that reached her eyes. "You must be the one who brought in our mystery guest." Her calm presence steadied the tremor in Mark's chest. Inside the reception area, warmth and the scent of fresh straw replaced the morning chill. Dana guided them through airy corridors where the faint sounds of animals, chirps, soft padding, distant rustles, wove through the quiet. "We specialize in preparing young predators for safe release," she explained. "They'll have space to roam, expert care, and eventually a wild home where they belong." Mark lowered the crate onto a padded bench and opened the door. Shadow stepped out gracefully, pausing only to glance back once, eyes gleaming like burnished gold in the soft light. Dana knelt, letting the cub sniff her gloved hand. "Healthy muscle tone," she murmured, admiring the sleek coat. "This little one is strong. He'll adapt beautifully." A lump rose in Mark's throat. He crouched beside Shadow and stroked the smooth black fur one last time, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath. "You've been my shadow in every way," he whispered. "Now it's your turn to chase the world that's calling you." Shadow's amber gaze held his for a long, silent moment. Then, with quiet dignity, the cub padded after Dana toward the double doors that opened onto a vast sunlit enclosure. Mark watched until the dark shape melted into the green beyond. As the doors eased shut, the echo of tiny paws faded into birdsong and wind. Love ached in his chest, but beneath it lay something steadier, a fierce, unexpected peace. He had given Shadow back to the wild, exactly where he was meant to be. Evening settled over Mark's home like a quiet benediction. The rain-soaked days of the past week felt distant now, replaced by a stillness that was neither empty nor lonely. Soft amber light from the wood stove flickered across the living room, painting long, gentle shadows on the floorboards where Shadow once padded with soundless grace. Mark walked slowly from room to room, each space carrying a memory as vivid as a photograph. The windowsill where glowing eyes first greeted the dawn, the tall bookshelf from which Shadow leapt like a dark comet, the armchair where a tiny body once pressed close for warmth. Every corner seemed alive with echoes of their brief but powerful time together. He paused at the kitchen table where the folded Wildlife Center receipt lay beside a note from Dana, the caretaker. Shadow is thriving. He explores every inch of his new world with confidence. We'll keep you updated until release. The words brought a bittersweet warmth that spread through his chest. Stepping out onto the porch, Mark breathed in the cool night air. Above, the sky stretched deep and star-pierced, the same wild canopy beneath which Shadow now roamed. He imagined the young cub weaving through moonlit pines, muscles flowing with untamed strength. The call of freedom answering something ancient in his blood. A quiet understanding settled over Mark. Love's truest form is not possession, but protection. Compassion sometimes means stepping back so another life can grow unbound. What began as an impulsive roadside rescue had become a lesson in the hardest, purest kind of care. He turned back inside, the house no longer feeling empty but honored, filled with the quiet certainty that a piece of the wild had passed through and left him changed. As the fire dimmed to embers, Mark whispered into the stillness, a gentle farewell carried to the night beyond the trees. Shadow's story would live on, not just in memory but in the freedom of the forest, a testament that real love sets free.